Be it in the hands of a ninja or a knight, there is no doubt that the sword is probably the most graceful weapon ever. When wielded well, the sword and the person holding it look like partners in an intimate and beautiful dance. And as much as swords have made many men and women famous, there are some swords who have gained fame for themselves. Let's take a look at some of them. Number 14. Joyeuse, one of the most influential names who is credited with bringing much of Europe under a single rule at one point of time. Charlemagne was a legendary leader, and his sword was no less. He called his sword Joyeuse, and legends say that it was forged from the same materials as Curtana and Durendal, two other famous swords. Charlemagne used Joyeuse to behead the Saracen commander, and there's even a town named after it. The sword was lost in battle once, but was recovered by one of his knights. Charlemagne was so attached to his sword that he gave the knight an appanage. Joyeuse can today be found at the Louvre and was even used in the coronation of French kings. Number 13. Excalibur, perhaps the most fabled and renowned sword ever. The Excalibur has many tales attached to it. It belonged to the legendary King Arthur of England, whose exploits at the Round Table will be talked about for a very, very long time. A huge part of King Arthur's fame is attached with Excalibur, his sword which is supposed to have special powers. It is said that the sword was buried in stone and no one had been able to pull it out before Arthur came along. And, after achieving many victories with Excalibur in hand, Arthur asked his knights to throw it in the lake, where the Lady of the Lake caught it. Many believe that Arthur is just resting and will wake up to claim his sword again when England needs him the most. Wonder if Brexit was his cue though. Number 12. Napoleon's sword. Napoleon Bonaparte was the military and political leader of France, and there is no doubt that he will remain one of the strongest leaders ever. And according to stories, the only thing he carried on a battlefield were a pistol and a sword, and the weapons he used were of the finest make, which is why he gave his sword to his brother as a wedding gift, and it has been passed down through the Napoleon family for generations. That is, until the gold-encrusted sword was declared a national treasure in France in 1978 and came up for an auction where it was sold anonymously for a sum of $6.4 million. Number 11. Durendal. This one is another sword associated with Charlemagne. Apparently, it was once his own sword, but passed into Saracen hands before one of his most trusted knights, Roland, got it back from the enemy. Wayland the Smith is said to have forged this blade, with which Roland won much acclaim in the battlefield. Durendal was supposedly given to Charlemagne by an angel, and he then gave it to Roland. Durendal is supposed to contain a tooth of St. Peter, blood of the Basil of Caesarea, hair of St. Denis, and a piece of the raiment of Mother Mary. All that while being supposedly capable of cutting down a boulder with a single strike. And even though Roland threw it in a vat of poison, many believe that it still exists, stuck in stone in France. Number 10. Wallace's sword. William Wallace was a Scottish knight in the 13th century who earned much fame for his brave deeds. They included many feats, including leading the charge against the English during the Scottish War for Independence. It was wielded by Wallace in the Battle of Stirling and the Battle of Falkirk to create terror among his enemies. What makes the sword so special is that it was enormous, and experts believe that Wallace must have been at least 7 feet tall to be able to wield it so effectively. Number 9. Ulysses S. Grant's Civil War Presentation Sword. When, in 1864, Ulysses S. Grant became the general-in-the-chief of the U.S. Army, he was presented with an intricately worked sword. It made the use of 26 diamonds to spell out the initial USG on the sword, and was at the time the most expensive sword ever made in the United States. It was presented to him by the citizens of Kentucky, as the position he commanded had only belonged to George Washington previously. The sword was made of pure silver and gold, and has the goddess Victory etched on it, and the American eagle spreading its wings over her head. In 2007, the sword fetched a price of $1.6 million during an auction. Number 8. Collada and Tizona. These swords belonged to a nobleman and a military leader in medieval Spain, El Cid Campeador. It is said that he won the Collada in combat from the Count of Barcelona, and Tizona from the King of Valencia. The swords exemplified his virtues of strength, loyalty, justice, bravery, sensibility, and education. He later presented these swords to his son-in-laws, but when he found out that they were beating his daughters, he took the swords from them and gave Collada to one of his knights. It is believed that the sword is still preserved in the Royal Palace of Madrid. Number 7. Kusanagi no Tsurugi. When you visit Japan and see their imperial regalia, you will notice that one of these three is actually a sword. It is the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, which translates into grass-cutting sword. The sword is revered by the Japanese, and there is a fascinating story behind it. The story goes that once there was an 8-headed snake who had killed 7 of the 8 daughters in a family, and when the snake was coming for the 8th daughter, the god Susanoo had an idea and placed 8 vats of sake behind a fence with 8 gates. As the serpent put each of its head into the gates, he closed them and proceeded to cut off the heads of the snakes and then the tails. When he cut the 4th tail, he discovered a great sword. That sword came to be known as Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Number 6. 7-branched sword. The Bakji dynasty was an ancient one in Korea, which controlled a lot of lands ranging from Korea to China. And when in 372 AD, they paid tribute to the Eastern Jin, they gave a specifically made 7-branched sword to the king as a sign of praise. The sword in itself is fascinating, having 6 branch-like protrusions along the center blade. It was not meant for battle, and there were many inscriptions on the sword. One of them says that it was made of 100 times hardened steel to repel 100 enemy soldiers, and many of the markings also refer to other kings, which suggests that a relationship did exist between the different kings in East Asian countries. It is currently housed in the Isona Kami Shrine in Japan, but it is not up for public viewing. Number 5. Shah Jahan's personal dagger. While not strictly a sword, it is one of the most renowned blades ever. Shah Jahan's taste for expensive and fine things is pretty apparent from his buildings and weapons, but one of his most treasured possessions he had was his dagger, which had his name, title, and place of manufacture encrypted on it. The dagger is a beautiful weapon with gold decorations and inscriptions, and there's really no wonder why it's a much sought-after relic, having been sold 5 times so far, with the highest amount being $3.3 million. Number 4. Curved Saber of San Martin. José de San Martin was an important Argentine general who was the primary leader of the southern part of South Africa's struggle for independence from Spain. One of his most famed possessions was his sword, a curved saber which he thought was easily maneuverable and ideal for battle. The importance of the sword can be gauged from the fact that he mentioned it in his will as the sword that accompanied him throughout the struggle for South America's independence. It is on display today at the National Historical Museum in Buenos Aires, though not peacefully, as it was stolen twice during the 60s. It's like a South American national treasure movie. Number 3. Gaojian. There are many legends in China, and this sword features among them. It is said that the sword belonged to Gaojian, the king of Yu State. Well, there can be little doubt about that because the inscriptions on the sword pretty much say so. And even though Gaojian was defeated in battle and lost his kingdom, he rallied to victory 10 years later with this sword in hand. The sword was then lost, but was found again in 1965 when it was unearthed in China. And such was the mastery of the craftsman, or maybe some magic was involved, but the sword was sharp as ever, even though it was buried for nearly 2,000 years. Number 2. The Cursed Muramasa's. One of the legendary sword makers from Japan is Muramasa. Apparently, he prayed to the gods that his swords would be great destroyers. And since his work was extremely good, the gods decided to grant his wish and imbued a bloodthirsty spirit in the sword. And if the sword was not getting enough blood in battle, it was said that it would drive its wielders to murder or suicide. Such was the notoriety of the sword that it was finally banned because it was considered cursed. The ban was put in place after most members of the family of Shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu were killed at the hands of the sword, including his wife and adopted children. So if you ever come across the Muramasa sword, be sure to stay away. Number 1. Honjo Masamune. Masamune was a Japanese swordsmith, and he is widely regarded as one of the greatest metallurgists of all time. No wonder his swords are known for their superior beauty and quality, but since he never marred any of his works by his signature, it is quite difficult to identify the originals from the fake. But one that is undoubtedly his is the Honjo Masamune, which represented the shogunate during the Edo period of Japan. It was passed down in the family till it was declared a national treasure of Japan in 1939, and in 1946, it was handed over to a US sergeant, but was later lost. It still remains one of the most important historical artifacts to have ever disappeared because of the World War. Have you ever come across a famous sword? Or seen any of these in real life? If so, make sure you let us know in the comments below. And remember to subscribe to our channel to get instant updates on our videos.